And now we're going to have with us today Russell White and Bill Lewis, and we're going to be talking about utilizing modularization will improve the probability of achieving project goals. And we're going to find out how to bridge the productivity gap through modularization. And so, Bill, Russell, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
Okay.
So welcome everybody. I think we're going to talk a little bit about productivity and how to improve productivity. Manufacturing and construction, there's been a big difference in a lot of years. So with a vibrant strategy, early engagement, you're going to be able to improve it.
Yeah, just a little bit to know, we have a sprint team. That sprint team's been meeting for several sessions over the last couple of years. We have really worked hard and collaborated on this the idea of front-end loading, what you do with modularization and front-end loading. And so we worked really hard on that, and we've got some things we want to share with you regarding that. But I just want to thank all of our team members, some of whom are here today, that have worked really hard on this particular topic. And we just want to share the results, the findings of that. And I'll tell you, Nicholas Johnson, his title is called Chief Evangelist, and I feel like our whole team are chief evangelists for modularization, because we just believe that this is a way for you to really gather and get some of that productivity back that we've lost over the years. Bill's going to go into that a little bit more detail in just a moment regarding stick build versus a modularization strategy. So let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, how is our traditional project execution strategy performing? Here's a few stats for you that are, I don't know if many of you know this, but just take a look at some of this. Per the Bureau of Economic Analysis, construction labor productivity has not changed since 1948. That would be about 75 years. Productivity has not changed in a demonstrative way in regards to productivity in the field on construction work. Here's another one for you. Construction labor since 1970, in the last few years here, 50 years, it's actually dropped about 30% in terms of productivity. And then the last one I want to share with you was a 2022 paper. It concluded that construction sector alone has accounted for about a third of the decline in a trend GDP, which is about $1 trillion every 5 years. Productivity in the construction space has really been an issue, as you know. And so hopefully today we'll just encourage you that there are solutions. And being chief evangelist in this area, evangelist means that we're bringing good news. And the good news is there is a solution. And one of those solutions is a modularization strategy. Bill, a little bit about the stick build versus modularization right here.
Yeah, we got a lot of challenges: labor resources, accelerated schedule, cost constraints, and I'll turn this on. I'm pretty loud anyway. But, so there's a lot of challenges that we have to deal with, and I think we're all experiencing that right now. And there is a lot of risk. We can navigate them, and there's mitigation strategies.
Yep.
And although it's a well-established method, we still struggle in the industry. You talk to people, and a lot of times they say, well, you can't modularize this, and I always say, why? What can you? Because there's never a case where it's zero modularization, and never a case where it's 100% modularization. I can see.
So the issue has become. We have a question here. What have you done for us, for me lately? And if you look at it, the market, the growth rate here, we see as far as being a projection through several sources say that it should range between 6 and 8.5% over the next 5 years and reach potentially up to $162 billion. In other words, what's the potential for modularization of all the projects that are going on worldwide? And so the potential's great, but the issue is, can it get actualized? Who's going to actually do this? And so, Bill, a little bit about what you see there in terms of executing.
We continue to see our projects challenged and trying to meet budget and schedule predictability. And we've kind of lost that, but we also have proven that with a good modularization strategy, we can bring predictability and we can bring cost control back into the fold.
Okay. And then something to note, today we know in this particular environment, here's some of the big ones that are happening right now. Data centers, power generation, chip manufacturing, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. We talked yesterday was talked about onshoring. We see that, and this is where the big demand in construction is currently in our environment. Well, with that being said, there is a great opportunity here to see modularization placed in these particular type of projects, and hopefully we'll just make the case. Again, what we're talking about today, it's logical, it's rational, but unfortunately for many of us, including the owners, Bill being a part of one, it's more than just a rational decision. It becomes an emotional one because you're protecting your environment, maybe you're protecting your reputation, maybe it's something that you don't know so much about. There's a lot of reasons why people won't do it, but we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So a little history about modularization, and this is a good slide that Bill put together. I thought was really neat. The first time that we had modular, that we've known about modular, was in this gentleman, this carpenter in 1830s England, decided he was going to build a house to send over to Australia. So when he moved, so that's been going around a long time. And then in World War II, we see that obviously we had to go out there and prefab structures to house our military in World War II, and we're very successful with the Quonset huts. But Bill, tell us a little bit about the Liberty ships. That's always a great story.
Well, if you think about World War II, the United States was pulled into World War II when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and we're going up against two worthy adversaries, and we had to get up to speed. So FDR put a system in place. But one of the things we really needed was these Liberty ships that was taking supplies to Europe and Asia. And, the U-boats were sinking them faster than we could build them. So they looked at the strategy, how they were building them, and they actually went to Henry Ford to understand the Model T line, the assembly line manufacturing. And so they started applying some of that same assembly line manufacturing to the shipbuilding effort. And as you can see, they built over 2,710 vessels, and the Robert E. Perry has a record for being built, which basically assembled in sections in 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. And you got to think about, they didn't have any computers back then. They didn't have any calculators. This was all done on sepia paper and number 2 lead pencil, and so it's pretty amazing. So when people say you can't modularize something, I just struggle with that completely.
All right, so leading up to this, I want to kind of build this up so Bill can talk about a little bit. One of the things we wanted to find out from our owners and constructors is we sent out a survey to try to get some answers in terms of, what are the big things that keeps you from doing that, or what you think are the benefits of modularization. And so the first one we want to talk about, Bill, is what's the biggest reason modularization isn't moving forward? Why it's not? And that's a good question for each one of you. In your mind, I want you to think about, what is it? What is exactly keeping your organization, or maybe some owners that that you work with, to keep them from actually modularizing their projects? So Bill, what was some of the things that we found out?
Well, this was from our CURT survey that we ran, and probably very few of it's going to surprise you. The first one was inexperience. The owner company has no experience with modularization, and it's a risk factor. They're afraid to jump over and actually try something new. As much as we talk about the new technology and go forward, people are still very resistant. Company culture, multiple reasons, and we'll probably hit on that a little bit later. Resistance to change. I'm happy. I'm doing my job. I got a job, and I'm moving forward. So it's I don't want to rock a boat any. Late project signals, which I think we're all experiencing that, or changes in design as we go ahead. Because once you start modularization, changes have a larger impact on you. Procurement concerns, whether you're stick building or modularizing, you still have to have a long lead equipment plan and understand how to get it. Organization lacks SMEs, and companies do not have the internal expertise. A lot of times I'll talk to people and they say, well, we tried modularization and it failed. And I say, well, why did it fail? Well, it was a Monday, it was a full moon, it was a leap year. Well, that's not a very good answer. You didn't have the right people assisting you. So I would say if you want to try modularization, get somebody that is an SME that's done it before to kind of tell you how to, you know, navigate that road.
And just a little thing about this is very interesting. And our team met on Monday and talked about this a little bit. You know, companies can get expertise, they can get experience, they can hire people, they can make earlier decisions, they can find vendors that are willing to go for that schedule. But the X factor happens to be cultural, which is more of an emotional decision. Do we really want to commit to this? And I think that's one of the things we can't affect. You know, everything else can be had, but until leadership in an organization says we're willing to do this, it's very difficult for a company to adopt a whole new practice maybe they're not used to. So that's, all of us felt like that culture one was a really big issue. So then the second survey question was, if these are the things that keep people from it, what then could the benefits be realized with a correct modular strategy? And I tell you, Bill, this is the ones that it makes rational sense, but again, I think a lot of times this issue is not rational. Bill? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, some of the things, accelerated predictable delivery, we know that we can do that. I think one of the things that I've seen in data centers with all my, you know, analytics was that I could cut maybe 10 to 12 weeks off the critical path because I can move a lot of my commissioning activities into a modular yard. And so when that module gets there, the probability of it failing or breakers busting or communication between, you know, the BAS and EPMS, you know, these systems, all my software was all set up and ready to go. You know, labor concerns are mitigated. I think every site, I don't know any place in the U.S. or even in most of the world where labor is not a concern right now. Cost effective, predictable. It is cost effective. My early years, we knew that we could accelerate schedule by modularizing. But, you know, normally the capital cost was higher. But the MPV, the return, because we were able to get to market faster, you know, it more than offset that additional capital cost. Repeatability, and I'm going to go to data centers and some pharma projects. You know, there's a lot of opportunity to optimize and standardize. We just don't do that yet, and there's a lot of business case reasons we think why that's not happening. Remote site locations, obviously that's a big concern. Weather concerns, somebody told me once that productivity is not better in a module shop than in the field, and I thought, well, you've never tried to make a weld in Ames, Iowa in January when it's 10 degrees and a 20-mile-an-hour wind. You would never say that if you'd had that experience, but anyway.
So with that being said, you know, one of the things that the team did is we got together and started talking about what are the important things that a modularization strategy needed to do to really think about certain factors early on in a project, and we came up with 13 different things that if you had to, we do these things anyway on projects, but in relation to modular, there's specific things you really need to pay attention to. So Bill, a little bit about those 13 that we come up with.
Yeah, you know, we talked about early feasibility study, you know, getting back into FEL 0. We need to have a strategy developed then, you know. So looking at our plot plans, where we're building it, what we're going to build, how we're going to get there, and we're going to go through each one of these in a little more detail. Yeah. Understanding the local, you know, you got to be accepted by the neighborhood, right? And there's always going to be issues, but there's ways to mitigate them. Interfaces, modularization and stick build. You're building part of it with a stick build method, and you got to bring modules in. You got to have a good integration. Labor studies, site-specific labor studies, module facility studies, long lead equipment, a good BIM strategy. You know, if you're going to use BIM modeling, then you want to have a good process where everybody gets what they need. And then as an owner, I always wanted to know, what's your path of construction? You know, if you're going to build this for us, how are you going to build it? How are you going to get it in there? I want to understand it. Level 2 schedule, because this is very early. This is all FEL 1 stuff. You're not going to have a lot of detail. Your design's not real advanced at this point, but So you got to have a good schedule, estimating, good commissioning and startup plan. You know, they always say you start with the end in mind. Well, it's even more important here. And then we're going to talk about greenfield versus retrofit opportunities, transportation, logistics, and the value proposition.
And so let's not let those 13 things scare you. We've got a lot of information on these screens. We're only going to hit the tops, which you're going to see in either yellow or orange, however it comes off. There'll be highlighted things that I think we want to highlight and say, especially these things in relation to modular. So again, don't let that scare you. We're going to move fairly quickly through this. The slide deck is on your app that you can download. And even if you need more information, we do have other documents, white papers, things of that nature we can reference. So if your team wants to really look at this ongoing, I think we can help you, because leading into our next topic here, what's so important is that there is information out there to guide you. You don't have to go into this thing thinking that you don't know how to do this, and this is an example right here. With preliminary plot plan and module concepts, it's very important. Obviously, on the first thing, everyone knows that you're going to select a site. You got to figure out what your plot's going to look like so you can begin to do that engineering. Here's one of the things that's very interesting. Just in plot plans and the case study analysis on that, there's already things such as this. This is 12 different specific nuggets that you go through and analyze to get to that. So this is just one example. I want to thank Michael Cluck of KBR and also Dr. Choi, who actually have written a book on this, in addition to a CII paper as part of a team that they were on. So these guys have worked very hard, and there's no reason why you can't educate your team or yourself. And I just want to just show you this real quick. On this case, this number 3 specifically, you can see that this is the steps in a flow chart. And then if you just drill into analyze site-specific project module potential number 3, they've actually broken it down into this many different items and tasks for you to go after. Let me tell you, there's plenty of information out there to help you really drill down and figure out where you're going to put your modules in that initial plot plan draft in fail 1. So this is just an example of how much information is really out there. And again, Michael and them's book is available on Amazon, and the white paper is available. And if you need that information, we can certainly get it to you. This is just one. The next one was local sensitivity receptor and permitting at fail 1. Bill, tell us a little bit about what are the local sensitivity receptors and how that relates to modular.
Yeah, so if you look at this list, you think, well, I got to deal with this on every project, but the other issue that you have to deal with is I'm moving large pieces of equipment through neighborhoods, and I'm crossing highways, I'm shutting highways down. I had one project where we shut southbound I-10 down one night just to move a module up to Baton Rouge area. I've had cases where we had to build a 4-mile heavy haul road from a dock into the location through the middle of a little town, and shut the interstate down at night every time we moved a module. So these are things that you need to understand. And then the first thing that happens when you get a permit and you announce, depending on what type of project it is, now really, with data centers, with chemical plants and stuff, is once that permits goes public, now you got activist groups coming in. And they're going to hit you up, and they're going to go to the local community. One of the larger projects I built, we had to go in and buy 40 houses. We had to build a new high school. We had to build a fire department. But it was a large project, and we saved enough with our module strategy that was still a viable process.
So then on the mitigation strategies, I know that this is something we do all the time. Yesterday we heard about the importance of communicating early and often. That still holds true there. Bill, anything about the mitigation strategy in relation to modular there?
Yeah, I guess for me, you want to build a relationship with the community. You need to get in early, especially if you're going to be building, highways and shutting their roads down and closing their access to a lot of places. So you want to get involved early. There's a price you pay for doing business everywhere, and just get in there and understand what it is.
Yep. Okay, so on commercial strategy and interfaces, what's really important from a module integration standpoint is, first of all, we're procurement. There's some things here, but I tell you to really identify your scope on what's going to be modular and what's not going to be modular. Can't emphasize that enough, because that begins to develop your packages. That kind of helps you understand what in addition to your normal long lead, what other things are you going to have to get to the fabricator very early in the project. So on the contracting strategies, what that forces you to do is build more partnerships early. You know, it's been the practice in our industry to not call the contractor until it's time to go to bid, and you get 3 bidders, and that's how we go about doing things. But as Bill will note, that it's more important that you get your fabricator and your contractors, your erectors, in meetings early on, fail 0, fail 1, right, Bill?
Yeah, I always talk, we start projects with the end in mind. Well, when you're doing modularization, a couple of things. As an owner, you need to understand that cash flow curve and your engineering all pulls to the left.
Yeah.
And when it pulls to the left, you need to get those fabricators, your GCs, your AEs, EPCs, all engaged early in that early strategy. They need to understand, you know, we're going to modularize this project. We've already done all the, you know, the feasibility analysis, and it's good, and we're going to go forward. With the market now, I mean, I talked to someone the other day about modularizing some electrical rooms for us, and they said, well, you know, if you can hold on till 2028, I may be able to work you in. Well, you know, that obviously with accelerated schedules, that going to work. And almost every module yard I know that's building data centers, you know, the hacks, the electrical rooms, the cooling distribution units, they're all busy and they're all expanding. They're building new module yards. There's one in Houston that's 1.3 million. He's got to lease another yard that's 1.4 million. I mean, these are big yards. And
so the last thing on commissioning, he just brought it up earlier, that it's so important to find a demarcation schedule on that, because remember, he said it's better to get as much commissioning done off-site than bringing it on-site. Because remember, in the old days, with stick bill, we're going to do a systems turnover schedule, and that all just kind of loads up at the end. Whereas if he can do more commissioning off-site, at the fabricator, so that when you bring it back on, we don't have to go through that commissioning step. Again, these are all important things when you're talking about commercial strategy with your partners in relation to a module integration. Now, what Bill likes to really talk about is this issue of labor studies. It's one of the big reasons why we want to go modular. So Bill, talk a little bit about the site considerations and some of the big reasons why we want to modularize because of labor.
yeah, I think one of the big advantages we see, if I can move 50% of my work hours off site to a more productive, you know, location, the big advantage I see is my congestion on the site. So my civil structural architecture work, getting ready for these modules to come in, you know, that goes a lot smoother. People are a lot happier because there's not so much congestion. They're not fighting with people or space for room. And then when you go to the module yards, the first thing you see is you start talking to people, and some of the people in these module yards have been there 20, 30 years. They're not leaving. And you know, they like to work. They're indoors. It's, you know, it's there. It's repeatable. They're going to have a long-term job. And what we find, productivity is better, safety is better, a lot of soft savings and benefits from that. And, you know, and they work with an assembly line manufacturing process. One of the big things, and I'm going to push this, is as on the owner's side, I don't have to pay all that per diem. I'm not paying per diem in a module yard. So I had a project recently, and they said, well, if we modularize, it's going to cost you $29 million. So we went on through the presentation, and then I'm listening to it, and I'm listening to how many hours they're taking off site. And when I asked them about what per diems we're paying, how many days, and you took those hours, our per diem savings was right at $200 million. So do I want 29 million or I want 200? It's easy answer, right?
All right, so let's look at long lead equipment. As we know, we always have long lead equipment on a job site. We understand that, and a lot of times we can get that spec'd out early so we can get those things ordered and get the dollars spent on that long lead. But this, with modularization, this is one of the challenges that a lot of people have a hard time overcoming, is that you're going to have to spend a little bit more money and make stronger decisions early to make it happen. And one of the things you have to do is just be able to have to engage with these vendors and suppliers and fabricators much earlier to get the advantages to the project execution. And then one of the things that Bill, continues to press is that modularization is really more of a lean assembly line manufacturing, right? So it's over there in the fabrication shop, in the module yard where you're really going to make your gains. But to do that, it could be the perfect world, just like the site, but you have to get the bulk equipment there. You have to get all your material on site so that you won't make those guys wait. Just as Bill said, it's gonna hurt more to make those guys wait, because they are meant to go in these module shops, and they've got people behind you. It's just not you they're working on. So on this strategy impact, as Bill said, everything's going to move left. And that's one of the biggest hurdles we have to overcome, is that an owner has to know he has to make earlier decisions, and more money is going to spend to the left. That schedule is going to move. But there are some great benefits to that. So how do we overcome that? Because the opportunity is there, because you're creating two parallel paths, as that point right there says. So in addition to that, when it comes to the benefits, I think one of the big things it does is it locks up that scope for module. As you know, when we don't lock up the scope, and the more we get into a project, the engineers and the owners will have a tendency to want to make these changes, and we have scope creep, and we have all these things that are going on with a project. But if we can get them to commit on modular early, we can lock in that scope, and that's just going to help us on the back end, right, Bill?
Yeah, and you need to, if you're a leader in a company, you need to lock that in. You need to have a real strong management of change process, and don't allow people to deviate from it. Unless, the old saying, is it safe? Does it work? Are we violating any environmental laws? No. No to those questions, move on.
Yeah, I was working on a project with a big refinery, and we were working with the corporate group. Then we had to go to work with the operations at the refinery. The corporate group wanted to pay for a Chevrolet, but the operations guys wanted a GMC. They wanted something a little better. And we're like, hold on, and so you've really got to lock that scope in, because otherwise it's just a never-ending thing. Whereas modular, you're going to have to make that decision way early in the process. So Bill, tell us a little bit about the BIM modeling and why that's so important with modular.
So this has been a little bit of a pain in my side for a lot of years. I started back when we had sepia paper and number 2 lead. We've elevated to computer-aided pipe sketching, then to 3D models. And, all the advertisements for 3D models is we can do this, we can do that, and we do that. And we get into projects and they say, well, no, I can't give you that information. I said, well, you told me when you sold me this software, I could do this and that. Well, we didn't set it up right. So it's key, the BIM model will give you tons of information. It's another technology that's out there, it's available, that we don't use very good. So we had Hal Brothers from Autodesk on our team, and he was actually educating us a little bit of all the additional things that could be done with the 3D modeling.
And then you said here that collaboration is the key,
yeah,
right?
It's like everything in this project execution process. You have to have a plan, an idea. What do you want out of that model? What kind of reports do you want to get? I always like to see the color coding in there so I can pop it up any day. I see real-time color coding. If it's yellow, it's being installed. If it's gray, it's being fabricated. Green, we had different colors for different steps through the process. So I'm a visual person. I want to see something. And for me, I thought that was so great.
And then also, you see the BIM modeling phases. It's going to affect every one of those phases, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to constructability and path of construction. One of the things that obviously near and dear to Bill's heart is to get that idea of how we're going to build this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about these projects and assessing how you go about constructability when it comes to a module.
Yeah, so this kind of, goes back to that collaboration team. If you talk to a lot of engineering firms and a lot of projects, we design it, and then we tell the construction people, here's your design. So they've been out there working in a void. Well, we got to get them engaged. And early on, in FEL1, even if it's still feasibility or conceptual stage, how are you going to do this? And we have a lot of animations with modules and stuff now where they'll actually show you every step how this thing goes together. And that's what we want to get to, that point to where we understand it forces collaboration, communication, right? We want to come in. I want to see that path of construction. I want to make sure that we understand how we're going to commission it. Mm-hmm. We understand how we're going to build it, and everybody agrees. So I don't get into my construction phase and they say, "Well, you can't build this."
But that can actually happen still in FEL 1, though. A general idea how you're going to go about building it.
It's early. It's that early strategy. Before you get to full project approval funds, you want to understand and have a real high probability that I'm going to be successful with this strategy.
And then also the second part of that on the preliminary, the considerations. Here's some important things here that you really need to be aware of. One of the big things, obviously, is if you've got in a general idea, you kind of know what kind of craneage that you need. But in the case of modular, especially when it comes to some of these mega modules or even mid-sized modules, it's going to impact your crane plan. And so you got to make sure not only that you have the right craneage on site, but start thinking about that. Obviously, you're going to be making calls to all the crane manufacturers, say, hey, do you have those cranes available? But you got to start thinking about ground conditions because maybe you hadn't thought about building out that road yet. And you really need to build out the road, right?
Yeah, a couple of things that you can see down here at the end. In the data center world, I've learned you got to have a demarcation plan. When you're shipping these modules, you need to think that through. And everybody, we build a demarcation plan, and every item, who's connecting the bolts, who's putting the cable lug together. I mean, you need to go into those details. So some of the big lessons learned and failures with data centers is a poor demarcation plan. They get there and they take 3 months commission it that they're supposed to do in 2 weeks. And then have a risk strategy for transportation delays. Another big project I worked on, we built modules in China. Some of them were 10,000 metric tons. We put them on commercial ships, brought them across the Pacific to the Panama Canal into Corpus Christi. Well, the first thing, typhoon season, you don't want to be crossing the Pacific. So you need to understand when's the best time, what wave actions you're going to see, what dynamic stress analysis is going to happen to your modules before you ship them. And then we got to the Panama Canal, and, U.S. turned that over, right? Chinese are running the Panama Canal. Guess what? It's backed up. Now what are we going to do? We're getting in line to bring our modules through the Panama Canal. So you got to think about everything that can possibly happen and have a risk mitigation strategy in place.
All right, so a couple of things I want to cover in the next two. One is schedule, and the next one's a little bit about cost. Remember, we're early in the process, FEL 1, very simple milestones, very simple activities, nothing major in this schedule, but what's important here is what we like to do is just check our math on the difference between stick build and modular and go ahead and have the scheduler and the team build out one for modular and one for stick build just to check our math to make sure things are as they seem, right, Bill?
Yeah, one of the things we found out, over the years is we still struggle understanding how to estimate a module project. Things like I mentioned earlier, well, I'm going to save money by saving all that per diem cost. Did we figure that in? Oh, I'm going to save money by NPV because I'm getting to the market 2 months earlier. We seem to not be able to really comprehend everything from the owner side through the execution of the capital project.
And then one of the main milestones I put on there is, again, that design freeze for the modular unit. So important to go ahead and lock that scope in and get that frozen as quickly as possible. That's a key milestone we like to put in those early schedules. The other thing here about sequencing is just remember the delivery time on these modules. Well, you want that to be just in time. And the reason being is when you start housing modules somewhere, do you even have room on site to do that? If not, what you're going to do is you're going to pay somebody a lot of money to hold those maybe over there by the port where you came in and you come offshore. Where in the world do you want to put those things? I don't know if it's Robert's in the room or not, but yeah, there he is. You know, he would love to house your module for a little while, I guess. But the best thing is get it to the hook as quickly as possible, right? So we have to have that timing right when it comes to that. You don't want to have to put that in the schedule and try to figure out, well, we're going to have to move the module around before we actually get it to the hook and get it set. So that's just some sequencing to be thinking about when it comes to your level 2 schedule. Again, it's early on, not a big deal, but we do want to get some milestones and some key activities in there that helps us with the modular strategy, a little different from just a stick build. Now, let's jump over to estimating. You know, again, FAIL 1 is conceptual. Most of the time, we're using something like Aspen CCE. It's an engineering type, you know, very conceptual estimate. We're trying to put all the numbers in. And just remember that these things are just the beginning of the whole process, plus or minus 30% or sometimes even 50% at this point. What we're just trying to do is get an idea of what this overall process is going to cost. And so really begin to assess all the options when it comes to module. Like Bill said, you really got to start thinking about, you know, where's our fabricators, where they're located. Do we want to go offshore? Do we want to stay inshore? All that transportation and logistics that really is a different impact to this job if we did stick build, right? You might have great reducing labor on there, but then we are potentially incurring risk when it comes to transportation. So when it comes to all that, we've got to build it in. And thank goodness, even today, Aspen CCE, which is most engineers use for conceptual estimating, they do have the modular capability where you can go ahead and price out modular and build that out. So there are some tools available for you to use in terms of estimating your modules. Bill, any other comments around your cost?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing where we highlighted there, fabricator early engagement. I think you're starting to see you know, a critical point here. Early engagement is critical to success. You know, these people that do the estimating from an owner's side and the EPC side, they're not builders. They're not building modules. They're not, and sometimes they just don't understand.
Yeah, and for instance, a couple of years back, we got a call from an offshore fabricator who was going to build some modules for onshore team, and they called us to help with constructability and said, hey, can you help us assess what makes most sense in terms of mega, mid, or truckable modules? And we worked with that team and kind of figured out, because it was in the state of Louisiana, it was coming up the Mississippi River, we had to get over the levee. There were a lot of options involved, and we just felt like, in your case, you probably need to do truckables. And so that seemed to work out for that team. But getting us involved early, and we weren't even eventually involved in the project, but we were excited about helping, because anytime we get a call from an owner and a fabricator to help with modularization, we answer the call, because it's so important to get that right the first time. So a little bit about commissioning and startup, Bill. So you always say what? Begin with the end in mind?
You begin with the end in mind, and you know, the strategy has to happen much earlier, and it's going to be pulled to the left. And you need to get the commissioning people. You know, I always started my projects with bringing, you know, my commissioning, my operations people, you know, my engineering people, my procurement, put them all in a room, and we took, you know, our flow sheets or our P&Is and one single line diagrams, and I'd ask my commissioning people, how are you going to start this plan up? And normally when I ask that question, I got a deer in the headlights look. They had never thought about how we're going to build an $8 billion project, and you haven't thought about how you're going to start it up. So I'd help them out, say, okay, we're going to need our undergrounds first. You're going to need water. You're going to need your fire systems. And we'd start working, and then I'd get them engaged. And normally, by the end of the week, we had went back and forth from you know, our operations commissioning team all the way back to engineering, you know, 3 cycles. So I think if I've went 3 cycles back and forth, I have a pretty good strategy. It's no different in modularization, other than, you know, because I have parallel paths, I can optimize the opportunity here by
So with,
getting more
with
done in the
data
shop.
centers, though, whether it's a GC and whatever, do they have a separate team to do commissioning, kind of like what we have in industrial, or is it?
It
how's
works
that
a little bit different with data centers. You know, you have your developers and people that are operating the data centers, but the end client could be a multitude of different companies. It could be, you know, Bank of America or Walmart or somebody. And we're building a data center, and the servers belong to them. So we bring their servers in. All we do is put them in place, hook them to the network. We're providing, you know, the network and all the infrastructure and utilities to operate their servers and manage those. So, you know.
All right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, another thing that we really thought about to bring up with our team is this issue of greenfield versus retrofit. You know, when we think about greenfield, we think pies, you know, the sky's the limit. We can do just about anything. It's a blank slate, right? But we have to be careful there in that particular opportunity, because a lot of times we don't use good judgment when it's a greenfield and think we can do whatever we want. But one of the things that we really want to do is look at that resource availability, assess, you know, if we selected this site, does it make sense for modular? And did we make the decision based on modular? Is the materials, the whatever we're building, is it something we actually can modularize? And then thirdly, as Bill said, is the workforce there to do it? So all those things, that's just one of the things in the decision making factor in terms of what should have been in terms of greenfield. Now look, the opportunities here are really good. You can really begin to see that the upgrade cost to evaluate this financial investment is required for a module retrofitting. On the retrofitting side, this is a whole nother issue. Bill's got some experience in that. There's an opportunity when we have an existing site and we know we're going to have to shut the plant down to maybe do a rebuild, right? Does it make sense for us to go ahead and modularize outside the plant, get that thing built, and be able to do a quicker swap out than it is in a greenfield situation? But I know it really depends upon your ability to, can you get in there? Do you have to cut it out? Was it designed to be able to bring that skid in? I know you got some experience there.
So my early career, you know, I worked in a DuPont fluoropolymers facility. We had cyclohexane, we had toluene, we had benzene, and we had to change reactors out on a pretty regular basis. And you know, we thought we had good strategy how we could change a reactor out in 10 days. The president of fluoropolymers came in one day. We gave our speech. He said, "That's not damn good enough. I'll give you 3 days." We said 10 days. He said, "I'll give you 3," and he left. So we had to figure out how to do that. And oh, by the way, if you had to do hot work in those areas, they had to evacuate all the columns and stuff, which was another week to evacuate. So we were restricted to mechanical joints only. So we built the whole reactors, modularized, brought them in, and was able to slide them in and bolt them down and just bolt the flanges and pipe up.
And then with data centers, just remember, you know, as the GPUs change, processors change, there is a possibility that you could retrofit in a data center and pull those out, right, and potentially put in new GPUs or whatever it is that's changed. That's a potential, but again, you have to look at those factors to see if it makes sense to be able to retrofit when it comes to modularization. So transportation and logistics, Bill, was something that obviously that it really impacts the job. So a little bit about the inputs.
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about shipping things across oceans and through canals and stuff. So you really need to decide that. You know, sometimes if for truck shippable, you know, you can use the roads. You can do rail. If you're on a waterway, you can barge stuff in. And there's some things where you have to go to your transportation logistics company because they know things. I think the first time I looked at a project we were going to do in Louisiana, you know, everything looked great until Robert told me it took me 18 months to get a permit to cross the levee. You know, it's like, all right, Robert, I don't like you anymore. But anyway, but you need to go to somebody that knows what they're doing, knows how to move big loads, has all the equipment, and then you can really improve the whole process.
And so then the output would be giving your team the shipping envelope of what size
Yeah.
we're going to go with, right?
Yeah. Have that plan completely rolled out. And, you know, we had to use submersible ships on one project. And, Robert, how long does it take to get a submersible ship now? How far in advance do you have to book them? What's that? At least 24 months. 24 months? So you better have a good strategy. You better engage early, right?
And then obviously benefits being accelerated schedule. Again, we believe that's one of the primary drivers here is that you will be able to get your project in on time or earlier. And then logistics, your takeaway, obviously early engagement. We've been beating that drum this whole presentation because it's so key in everything that we do. So Bill, and all of this, and kind of wrapping up, what's the real value proposition? You know, again, we know this is logical. We're talking logic and makes sense. And a lot of times this is, again, an emotional decision, but Bill, a little bit about the accelerated delivery.
You know, from an owner standpoint, we want to improve that whole capital execution process, right? And with modularization, you know, we found that we can run parallel paths. Mm-hmm. And, you know, sometimes we actually had to pay more capital cost. But because we were able to get started up and get to a market faster, you know, that overcame any of that, right. Especially in the early years when companies had patents on certain items. You know, it was, I got a blank checkbook, you know, do whatever you need. You meet this date. And we also had issues where we had already, you know, agreed to a delivery date with our customers. And if we can't meet our delivery dates, you know, they're going to go somewhere else. So we're going to lose a customer.
And then what about cost savings? Again, we believe that there's some cost savings involved.
Yeah, you know, when you start thinking about the cost savings, if you think about now what we're dealing with and productivity at our sites, I know we just went through, you know, a cold spell. Well, you know, one of the sites I was talking to, they've been shut down all week. A little bit further north, you know, we're all dealing with that. I don't have to worry about that in a module yard.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm inside a facility, that the only thing I have to worry about is getting the people to work.
So I think we had a discussion earlier with someone today, and we talked about the number one driver, I think, mostly for data centers and a lot of the onshoring is speed to market. If you're really, as an owner, want speed to market, modularization is a real factor. But the question becomes, are you going to really waver in that and start thinking about some other things? Because if you want an accelerated delivery, we really do believe modularization will get you there when you expect it to, or even earlier. But that speed to market, I think, is one of the main drivers why, if that is your issue, that's your number one driver, you really need to consider modularization. Yep. And then just a little summary here. One of the things I highlighted when Bill wrote this is that as much as we talk about technology, and I use my I'm from the Gulf Coast, y'all, you know, technology alone cannot change the direction that we're headed in of this particular curve. What we have to understand is that we have to change not only technology and use it, but we have to change the way we think and actually use something that can give us the best opportunity for success. And we believe modularization will do that. When applied correctly, it will make it happen. Bill, just in summary, closing.
Yeah, you know, I think you have to ask yourself, you know, we've all done PERT masters and Monte Carlo simulations for risk. You need to really look, where is the risk? Is the risk with my traditional stick build model, or is it with a modularization strategy? So those are the kind of questions you need to come. And you're always going to struggle here, at least for a while, until we change the culture. You know, you follow the business case, right? If I'm a GC and you want me to give 50% of the work hours to a module shop, that's not part of my business case. I'm selling billable hours, right? I look at modularization with data centers, and I think there's our basis of design. You know, we're going to build 80 of these, you know, these type Ballard modules or the colos, data centers, and if I'm an architect, why would I just take those blocks and just fit them on a site, move them from east to west, north to south, you know, when I can, why would I build one data center when I can build 10?
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's not part of my business case. And then even on the owner side, you know, I found that a lot of times our engineering organizations on the owner side, we build big dynasties. I've seen some of them, you know, go quadruple in 2 years. And now I got my dynasty. If I'm going to modularize, do I really need all these people here? Right?
So today, we just wanted to give you a little teaser of all the information we've accumulated over the last couple of years working on the sprint team, taking different approaches to it. We appreciate your time. Again, we have a lot of backup data. If you need that, the presentation is sitting on the app. So we, again, appreciate your attention, and we just hope that we've been able to whet your appetite a little bit about modularization. Thank you.